This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Power up your spring burn-off and savings with AIM EC Herbicide. Control the toughest weeds, plus get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Today, we're in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. We're at the Western Canadian Crop Production Show. The best part about this week is it is not minus 50 Celsius. It's actually kind of nice outside. Packed a vest, didn't pack a big winter jacket and a toque and mitts. It's actually kind of comfortable. It's a nice, refreshing change for Saskatoon here in the first part of January. Farmers from across the province and, quite frankly, Western Canada, probably Montana, North Dakota, up here this week to check out the latest in technology and machinery and everything that is going on. And kind of cool, today's show is brought to you by the FMC Pre-School. Yeah, so we're going to be hearing today all about Kochia. We are hosting an event together here, the war against Kochia. To me, that's kind of a war worth fighting. If you're a longtime listener to this program, you know that I am terribly allergic to Kochia. I hate Kochia more than any other weed that is out there. I hate Kochia. And the worst part is, it's a tough one to control. It's a tough one to take care of. And it's a growing problem. This used to be a problem just designated for little areas like southern Alberta. Hey, that's a southern Alberta weed. Don't worry about it, Saskatchewan. Not so much the case anymore. It continues to grow in geography. And we're going to talk about that and all the strategies that we can use to try to kill this sucker here at the FMC Pre-School event. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line. It is 855-776-6147. And if you want more information from FMC, go to ag.fmc.com/ca to find out all the products and strategies to kill not only Kochia, but a lot of different weeds that are out there. So today's lineup, it's a good one. We're going to be talking to Dr. Joe Ickley. He is from NDSU. Oh, we got to talk about that big Bison win. That big win just over a week ago in football. You know, I can't go that long without talking about college football around this show. We've also going to be joined by technical sales managers for FMC. They are Rachel Evans and Deanna McLennan will be joining us to talk about their perspectives on how to take care of, we are Kochia from front to back today. And I am very much looking forward to it. Looking in the pamphlet here from FMC, and it says the average yield loss from Kochia pressure in spring wheat can be 20%, 13% in canola and field peas, as well as 7% in oats. I actually thought the field pea number would be a little bit higher. And, you know, I was kind of jotting down some notes about Kochia, and we'll talk to Dr. Ickley about this a little bit. But here's some of the things about Kochia. Very drought tolerant. Okay, if you have Kochia issues, you'll often say that stuff grows everywhere, and it kind of does. So drought tolerant, also is very salt tolerant. It'll thrive in saline soils. It established rapid growth. Like it goes from like these little, oh, look at those little itty bitty Kochia, little cotyledons, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's through the canopy. It comes in waves. At least that's been my experience. Seed production. Right? We talk about this with weeds, the multiplier effect. One plant, my understanding is, will generate up to 25,000 seeds. Well, we'll talk to Dr. Ickley about that a little bit. Aggressively competes. Weed resistance. Okay, so like group 2,4 glyphosate. And I already mentioned, maybe the most important part from my selfish perspective is I'm really allergic to it. So there is that as well. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dr. Joe Ickley from NDSU. out of North Dakota. We'll talk about this weed, Kochia, and what are some of the things that we can do to fend against it here at the FMC Pre-School event called The War Against Kochia. Farm smarter with SGS. Our expert seed testing ensures your crops start strong and thrive. From germination to vigor to disease testing, SGS delivers results you can trust. Plus, we've added new wheat midge refuge varieties perfect for seed growers. Need precision? Explore our seed testing packages with built-in savings. Call us today at 1-800-952-5407 or visit cropscience.sgs.ca. SGS, when you need to be sure.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting today from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, here in the heart of the Western Canadian bread basket, so to speak. We're at the Western Canadian Crop Production Show, and we are with FMC. Their pre-school event is entitled The War Against Kochia. They got a bunch of growers coming in here today to learn and to chat and really try to, I guess, up their learning and maybe some of their strategies as they try to deal with this weed that creates not only yield loss, but a lot of heartache in trying to deal with it. It is a frustrating sucker. But here's the good news. I got a guy here sitting beside me that if anybody knows how to take care of Kochia, it is Dr. Joe Ickley out of NDSU. Dr. Ickley, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Hey, good. Hey, welcome to Canada.
Thank you. Not often I get to drive this far north and have it get warmer as I drive north.
Yeah, you go back to North and listen, North Dakotans, they understand Canada, but I always find it interesting with some of our rural radio audience here on SiriusXM where somebody will ask me from like Georgia, does it ever get warm there? Yes, it does actually in Canada. North Dakota it does, Minnesota it does.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I know North Dakota will kind of the record coldest state and the third record hottest state. So we get all the extremes. I know it's the same thing as I go north across the border.
If you like seasons, we're your place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. How about that big bison win last Monday night?
Always exciting. That's number 10, so now there's one for each finger. So that makes everyone pretty happy around campus.
NDSU football, like I have two sons in North Dakota. So my oldest has been to a couple games at the Fargo Dome. And that is like, besides Vikings football, NDSU football, that's no offense to the people at UND, but come on, that's like the sport that people watch, right?
Oh yeah, UND, they get hockey. But yeah, NDSU football, it's always amazing how many alum come in from all corners of the state every Saturday for the tailgating and football experience. So it is definitely what fills up our fall, and it's always great to go down to Texas in January and come home with a trophy.
I talked to a few people at the game, though. It was cold. Texas in January, not warm.
No, it can get cold.
Yeah.
And it was that day, but maybe that was an advantage for us.
Okay, you're gonna be speaking to the farmers here, and Kochia. You heard my rundown there, providing the context for why this weed is a challenge. And a lot of times we talk about thriving, weeds you don't want. Palmer amaranth is the one that everybody jumps to, and Kochia. It's not a Palmer amaranth. That's a whole different league, right?
I kind of use the analogy that Kochia is our Palmer amaranth. So, when we talk about just how many herbicides a weed is resistant to, yes, Palmer amaranth is king. But we basically have a homegrown version is what I kind of call it. So we do have plenty of herbicide resistance, which makes it difficult to control, and it is well adapted to our environment, which I heard you mention, drought, saline soil, salty areas. It's kind of adapted to that environment. So it doesn't get the headlines that Palmer amaranth does, but to me, it's equally as problematic for us.
Yeah, so how big of a geography is it impacting right now?
So looking at kochia is definitely in the dry areas. So even within North Dakota, if we have a wet year, the eastern third of the state, we'll find kochia, but I don't get that many questions on it. The best thing for kochia control is excess water. Once you get into Minnesota, eastern part of the United States, and kind of similar in Canada, if you talk about down in Ontario, it's not going to be an issue because there's just so much moisture. So it really is a kind of the Great Plains and then up into the Canadian prairies. That's where kochia is king, and then kind of out into the western coast as well. So those dry areas, kochia loves it.
Okay, well that's a lot of our audience is like, yep, that's me. But what we've been seeing, I know in Alberta, is it was kind of a southern Alberta thing, the Palliser Triangle, and it's worked its way north. So is it adapting or what's happening?
Yep. So anytime a weed is introduced into a new area, it's probably in the background somewhere. Some of the literature, it takes about 20 years for a weed to really become adapted to an area. Oh. And so we can often see railroads, for instance, is an area where we often see kochia. Maybe it's going to be along the tracks for 10, 20 years. If it becomes adapted to that environment, then we do start seeing it more in fields, and then probably just a matter of time until it becomes a major player in some of these new areas that's being introduced into.
Your research show 25,000 seeds per plant, or is that number out to lunch?
That's about the average. We can get much higher.
Really?
We can get close to 100,000 if we get some of these big 6-foot tall big bushes. Some of those plants without competition can really pack on the seed. For me, I often talk about with these seed producing weeds, if we go into a wheat field and harvest it and cut off the kochia plants that are in there, we can then have regrowth in that time frame between small grain harvest and frost and still pack on up to 10, 15,000 seed per plant when they're much smaller. So at 25,000, that's a really good average number to play with, but we can see the extremes, and when we have these small plants pack on 5 figures of seed, that's how you can kind of see a plant like this can proliferate pretty quickly within a field or geography.
What is it about the salt tolerance? Like that's not, we can't get crop to grow in some of those saline areas, but yet kochia seems to thrive.
Yeah, and some of these plants are just really well adapted to these salty areas. Unfortunately for us, kochia is one of them. Some people might view kochia as the MVP of salt areas if they've got some cattle to feed. You can feed it on occasion, but that is the downfall. Is you might have perfectly clean fields where you have a crop, but if you have some of these saline areas without a crop, kochia will come in and fill the void. So nature always finds a way to fill in voids like that.
I'm assuming there's been some research done on, it grows so easily, it seems. Should we just make it a crop? Is there a function for this? That seems, like you mentioned, like grazing some cattle, but otherwise I'm not sure it's gone anywhere.
That's always kind of life's biggest joke in my opinion is every time we think we can take a weed and domesticate it, it's just not going to grow. Or another weed will come in, and then we have to worry about controlling that weed in this. So, we brought over different biotypes of kochia for garden plants because it can get kind of pretty when it's in the fall, but it's not going to be on anyone's radar for a crop. Because the other thing with kochia that I don't think we've talked about yet is it is a tumbleweed.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine trying to thread the needle of harvesting that crop before it all blows away. So that alone is probably going to prohibit us from ever making it a crop.
Yeah, there's probably a good chance if you've seen that tumbleweed, rolling across the landscape, and you see that in the movies, and going back to the Old West, or even looking out your back window, depending on where you live, it could have been a kochia plant.
Absolutely. Kochia, the other big one for us is Russian thistle, but those ones are always blowing around the landscape and tend to make the news every couple of years when we get the right windfall patterns.
That probably helps with spread as well, right?
Absolutely. That's, we often talk about different weeds that seed spreads around via wind. So what we call it horseweed, Canada fleabane is maybe one of the prime examples, dandelion. Kochia kind of does the same thing, just not in the air. It's going to tumble across and spread around. So I think every weed scientist has a good picture of a herbicide-resistant kochia blazing a trail across the field and finding that herbicide resistance the next year because you sprayed a certain herbicide, and you just see a trail of kochia that survived that particular application.
Yeah, after the break, we're going to talk about some of the control measures and ways to tackle it. But one of the other points that I identified was rapid growth. Would you classify it that way?
It's rapid at a point. So kochia is one of the most fascinating plants, in my opinion, because it will germinate as soon as we get above freezing. It does not take a whole lot to get that plant to germinate. And we've seen years it will just sit there at about just a couple leaves for weeks. But then once we do get the heat, then yes, it will rapidly grow after that point. So it's amazing. It thrives in heat, thrives in drought, but it will be one of the first plants to come out of the ground in the spring, and it's very frost tolerant as well.
And competitive.
And very competitive.
Yeah, I remember one year we were growing field peas. And, you're limited in your herbicide options when it comes to field peas, but, your pre-seed is really critical. And I remember we had this beautiful crop of field peas. The canopy had closed. We were turn to turn, and all of a sudden, that clean, nice tabletop field of field peas all of a sudden had these little green evergreens sticking out. And about a week later, all you could see was kochia. It'll take over late. It's not like it's hard to choke out from a crop competitive standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Once it has a foothold, it's going to find a way to be very competitive, and it's one of the few weeds where I often will see people combining around patches because you get those big, basically Christmas trees. It kind of looks like it's hard to feed those into a combine, and if you can, it's often not worth the crop that's there in some of these really large patches. So. And that's just one of the other things that makes it a big problem. You get these big competitive patches, you're going to have some loss.
It's one of the reasons why a lot of people were doing pre-harvest glyphosate applications, which isn't that common south of the line, but more common north of the line in a crop like wheat, is to take care of some of that late kochia that was poking through the canopy and the high moisture really making harvest a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, we'll have pre-harvest applications primarily for kochia and small grains and many crops, but small grains particularly because that July, August time frame, we want to get that crop out, but kochia is just green and you can't feed that. So glyphosate, we shifted to a few other products, and we'll probably talk about that after the break, how some of them aren't working like they used to.
Yeah. Okay, so we've established we hate kochia.
Absolutely.
For a lot of good reasons. When we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the strategies for you to tackle it in this war against kochia. We are broadcasting from the Western Canadian Crop Production Show. We're with FMC at their preschool event. We'll be back right after this.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on RealRadio 147 Sirius XM, brought to you today by FMC Pre-School. We're at the War Against Kochia event at the Western Canadian Crop Production Show in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. If you've never been to the Western Canadian Crop Production Show, I highly encourage you to do so. I kind of walked around this morning, and great showcase, the latest in machinery, technology, a lot of seed companies that are here, and a lot of people trying to help you increase your profitability, your efficiency, and everything else that goes on the farm. We are talking about Kochia here today with FMC and the Pre-School event. We're joined, continuing the conversation, with Dr. Joe Ickley out of NDSU. Okay, so we've established, Joe, we hate Kochia. Control and trying to hold back some of the negative impacts. At the beginning of the show, I said the average loss from Kochia pressure and spring wheat can be 20%. That is significant, especially at a time where margins are thin. That, 5% reduction in yield hurts us, and maybe is the difference between making, breaking even and losing some money. So what is the message to the group here today in terms of some of the measures you can take to tackle this sucker?
One of the important messages we're going to spend a lot of time on discussing today is some of the newer herbicide resistance issues we're facing with Kochia. And so I always like to give a talk, and while I'm doing that, tell a story. And so I think we need all the proper background to really see why we have limitations and then proceed forward with some of the ways to manage it. And so I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about resistance to the Group 14 herbicides. And so these have been used primarily in broadleaf crops, but we have used them in the burn down, or I guess pre-seed applications. Things like saflufenicil. We call it sharpened heat, I believe, is the trade name up here.
Yep.
We have resistance to that. It was first confirmed in Canada in 2021. We found it in North Dakota in 2022. And we're still not entirely sure why, but it has become very widespread in the subsequent years, to the point we basically have that resistance biotype in every corner of North Dakota. And that's really a game changer for us for that pre-plant or pre-seed window to control Kochia. Really limits the options. And then we also have some of our other Group 14 herbicides, things like sulfentrazone, which is Authority, that we're seeing some mixed results. So the performance may not be as good as it used to be on some of these populations. And so really kind of describing what Group 14 resistance in Kochia looks like is going to be a big part of the discussion today. And then proceeding with, okay, if you do have that type of resistance, then how do we manage it? So
with any weed resistance strategy, is it a case of herbicide layering? Like, what are some of the things we can do?
Yeah, so some of those strategies that most weed scientists you'll listen to talk about are still very viable. So layering different herbicides, tank mixing different effective active ingredients, that's going to be a very important part of the process. One thing that we have shifted to, particularly in no-till crop production, and we've done this for over a decade now, but fall applications of herbicides, because Kochia is one of the first things out of the ground in the spring, have been beneficial. But with this new resistance, we are kind of shifting which products we're looking at. And so that's kind of part of the process, because one thing we maybe didn't talk about with Kochia is when it does come up in the spring, it's often a very dense mat. Yep. So it's not just one plant that comes up, it's that plant and a million of its buddies.
Like a carpet.
Exactly. And so some of these fall applications, even if they're not 100% effective, if you get rid of 50 to 70%, that makes the ones that come up a little bit easier to deal with. You get good coverage of your pre-seed application or whatever herbicide you're applying in a foliar fashion.
So think more fall application.
Yep, we're doing that quite a bit in North Dakota and ahead of conventional tillage as well. But primarily that's a very important strategy for us in no-till crop production.
See, this is one of the challenges is the tilling part of it. It's not like we're in the real dry area. It tends to be very no-till.
Yes.
And so it's really, it's been good for preventing soil erosion and retaining that moisture that is there, but it's given the weeds like Kochia a little bit of an upper hand, so to speak.
Yep, exactly. So we always talk about trying to use all the tools in the toolbox for weed control we have available, and tillage is still one of those tools, particularly for a weed like Kochia. If you get that first flush in the spring, comes up and can till it, then that's at least a good start to the management season for those who can utilize that. Yeah. Which this far west and this far north, we're not going to be that many utilizing tillage.
Some of the audience is cringing right now, Joe. They're like tillage. Oh, I'm getting a rash. But hey, I get really itchy face from kochia period. So now, would that be like a tickle tillage, so to speak, or would there's got to be some depth to it?
It would have to be some depth.
Okay.
Yeah. So tickle tillage.
I was trying to cheat there a little bit.
Well, I like that term because that's all you're doing with the kochia. Just tickling it.
Okay. Well put, my friend. Well put. Okay, so fall application, we're taking care of those dandelions, be thinking about kochia at the same time. That makes a lot of sense. What else can we do?
One of the other things that is really important for us, and this is why I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about herbicide resistance, is that there may be a situation where some crops are a no-win scenario if you have kochia that's resistant to 3 or 4 different sites of action.
Okay.
So we will spend time on, within these populations, what still works. Good news. For small grain producers, we still have plenty of effective options in small grains. I know there's not a whole lot of corn in Saskatchewan, but for those who grow corn, plenty of options in that crop as well. So really getting to know the biotypes, the resistance that you have within your field, and trying to plan some crop rotations around that can be a big part of this overall war.
Which crop? Okay, so you gave the crops we could still grow. Which ones can't we grow? Or maybe we have to cut back on?
So some of the more tougher ones are going to be things like our pulse crops. So we do have a few options remaining in lentil, chickpea, field peas, but we have to catch the kochia when it's small.
Yep.
And that's really our best chance. So within kochia, I don't think we have a no-win situation yet, but we have to be on top of our A game if we want to get good kochia control within those crops.
Is it true what I said? I like how I'm asking you to fact check me. But I mentioned the flush, like where it feels like there's multiple flushes of it. It's not just like, hey, I took care of the early, took care of them, but then they still showed up.
Nope, that's absolutely a thing with kochia. So
Okay.
I mentioned it's one of the first weeds out of the ground. But we can track emergence throughout July. We've done this within North Dakota, and oftentimes it might just follow the rain pattern. And if we get a very dry start to the year, then all of a sudden, late June and July, it starts raining. That's when kochia is going to emerge. So that is the bigger challenge. Hopefully, in the average year, we can take care of that first flush or the first couple of flushes and have a good competitive crop established by the time we get into July, so we don't have those later emerging kochia plants to deal with. But if we have salt saline areas, holes in the crop canopy, some of those late flushes can be a problem for us.
I'm looking in the did you know component here of the FMC Pre-School primer. I think we should be asking the Europeans for compensation. They brought this over to North America in the late 1800s as a ornamental. What were they thinking?
I don't know, but that's probably that's those of us who settled here. So we better be careful of where we point the finger there.
Brought it in our backpacks. So I have never heard. I didn't realize this, but kochia has some other names: burning bush, mock cypress, Mexican firebush, and Mexican fireweed.
And I have a packet of seed in my office back on campus that has seed of kochia being sold like that.
Really?
Because some of those, there are some more ornamental looking varieties, I guess, of kochia. But one of my predecessors really liked to collect these different weed species that have a ornamental biotype or variety. And I have packets of those in my office. And I believe it's either burning bush or Mexican fireweed is how it's being marketed. 25 cents for a packet of kochia seed.
Interesting. What's the Mexican part of it? I wonder what the history there is.
That would be interesting because, as far as we know, is basically that Russia, Eurasia area where we brought kochia over from.
Yeah.
And so it is, I mentioned this weed does love heat as well, so I'm sure it thrives just as well in Mexico.
It does. Oh, just, it like I've been talking about, it's a real bugger. Okay. Is it possible if we're struggling with kochia populations on the farm, are we ever really ahead of it, or can we ever really get rid of it? Or is it, if you've got it, you've got it, and this is like an annual challenge? What are you seeing?
So one of the things that we do mention a lot of times with kochia, if there is kind of one chink in the armor, is that the seed it produces is relatively short-lived in the soil.
Oh.
If you can stay weed-free of kochia, and the bigger challenge is exclude more kochia from coming into your field, after 2 years, 99+% of the seed is basically not viable. There's always this kind of small percentage that could persist, longer than that. But if you can stay weed-free, not have kochia seed be introduced into your field, it can be managed. Get it down to a manageable population, easier to deal with after about 2 good growing seasons.
Is winter wheat a strategy because you're creating competition earlier on that ground, or is not a big deal?
Nope. Winter wheat, winter rye, they're very competitive. So if you have a good stand going into the winter, that's going to green up before kochia will emerge and germinate and be very competitive against kochia plants. So in the U.S. now we're looking at a lot of cover crops.
Yep.
And if we have winter wheat or winter rye, we're talking about the grain yield, but that's basically a cover crop, certainly from the standpoint of kochia management. So those are very viable crops.
Yeah.
And with the crop itself, kochia shouldn't be too much of a challenge. If you have an early harvest, you can get some of those late germinating kochia plants, maybe something to look at after harvest, but certainly some of the better crops we can use if kochia is of top concern.
One of the challenges with cover crops is, again, it's in parts of North Dakota, parts of Manitoba, where there's moisture, cover crops work. That's maybe not where kochia is the most prolific compared to, say, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, or Glasgow, Montana, for example. It's hard to have cover crops in some of those spots.
Oh, right. That's one of the things that I do usually be a little cautious with kochia and cover crops because, we don't want to use up the moisture then either. Yeah. But that's why I kind of mentioned it is a good suppression tactic.
Yeah.
And so if you have that winter wheat or winter rye and that's the grain yield you're going for, then that's, think of it like a cover crop for kochia control.
Yeah. Before we wrap up here, is this really... like you mentioned that this is our version, or this is our Palmer amaranth. Is this the weed that we're going to be talking about and trying to fight here for the next number of decades? This is it. This is the one.
It's certainly up there. So weeds always ebb and flow, and so we may enter a golden era. I'm crystal balling this right now, but may enter a golden era of 5 to 10 years where it's relatively easy to control.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the case? I'm thinking probably not. I'm just kind of looking at the landscape of what herbicides we have resistance to within kochia now. What herbicides might be coming on the horizon, and right now it's not really the most rosy picture, but we're certainly trying to be as diverse with our tactics as we can be to make sure we stay ahead of this weed. And trying to keep the other bad ones out because we don't want them to be established.
Staying ahead of it, stay on top of it, and have a strategy, right?
Yes.
That's what you got to do.
Yep, that's why we call it the war. This isn't a one-year battle. This is a multiple-year campaign.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we've been talking to Dr. Joe Ickley from NDSU. Joe, this has been great to meet you, and if we got to chat more often, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, this has been great, and every time I come north, if you can dial up weather like this, I'll keep coming.
Yeah, just be careful of our beer.
Actually, I heard there's a beer this week that it's just in production for the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's something for you and I to check out besides all the machinery. Okay, when we come back here on RealAg Radio, brought to you by the FMC Pre-School, we're going to talk to Rachel Evans and Deanna McLennan from FMC. They're technical sales managers, and they'll join us when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
What's next doesn't happen by accident, doesn't happen by chance.
What's next happens when experience meets expertise, when data meets dollars, and when steel meets earth.
What's next happens when the promising work of Pioneer's state-of-the-art research centers meets the unsparing challenges of more than 17,000 on-farm trials.
Our ultimate goal is to bring the next seed breakthrough to your field.
Because Pioneer isn't just our name.
It's our mission. Pioneer.
What's next
happens here.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. We're at the FMC Pre-School event called The War Against Kochia. We just talked to Dr. Ickley from NDSU. We covered a little bit of football talk, but we really dug in on Kochia here. Why this sucker is so established, why it's really kind of a danger to your farm profitability, and what are some of the things you can do to try to control and manage this really aggressive, competitive, salt-tolerant, drought-tolerant, bad weed. It is bad and continues to increase in geographical profile. And I know these two ladies are having to talk to a lot of customers about some of the challenges of Kochia. Let's get to our next guest. Up first, it is Rachel Evans. She is a technical sales manager with FMC. Rachel, great to meet you.
Morning. Nice to meet you too.
Great to meet you. So tell me, what is a technical sales manager? What do you do?
Good question. Basically, we are regional agronomists. So I cover an area from Winnipeg all the way up to Yorkton, down to Swift Current. And we support our sales team in product information, agronomic information. We work with customers on specific challenges that they might have, trying to find solutions within our portfolio and outside of that. And involved also in various aspects of our organization within marketing and communications. Basically, anything you see in print from FMC has gone through tech service in terms of reviews, that type of thing.
Yeah. You see a lot of different conditions from Yorkton to Swift Current.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And from the Red River Valley to Swift Current.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe even more so that way.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Also joining us is Deanna McLennan. She's a technical sales manager as well with FMC. Deanna, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so what region are you covering?
I currently cover all of Alberta, so from Lethbridge to Peace, as well as northern Saskatchewan.
Whoa. Okay, so both you ladies, those are that's not like I am covering a couple counties. That is vast geography.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In 1 year, how many kilometers we put on a truck? You ever looked at that? I'm going to guess you're like 100,000.
You know what? It's not that bad. I would say probably, and the reps would laugh at this, right? But maybe it's like 30,000 a year.
Okay.
And so, the way I describe it is we don't travel every day, but when we do travel, we cover great distances. So, doing a 10-hour haul and doing a big loop through the territory, that kind of thing.
Alberta's a big province.
It is. I feel like I've just scratched the surface of that province, really.
Yeah.
And I agree with Rachel. For us to be effective in our roles, we can't be burning ourselves out trying to cover every corner of our territories.
Well, thank goodness for some of the technology now where, hey, I got this problem, and you can say, hey, can you send me a video or a picture?
Yes, or FaceTime the reps when they're in the field.
Yeah. That's one of the benefits of technology for a role like this.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. So where'd you grow up then?
I grew up in southern Manitoba on a grain farm between Killarney and Pilot Mound.
Ah, nice. So what's been one of the, as you've tried to cover the Alberta territory from a technical standpoint, what's one of the things about Alberta agriculture that's a little bit different than back home?
There's many things that are different. Like when we're thinking about the Peace River region, their shorter growing season, it's more fast and furious, getting started there in the spring. But then when we move down to Lethbridge, the crops are pretty different, getting more into pulses and then specialty crops as well.
Yeah, so in the ground way earlier.
Exactly, that too.
Early.
Yes.
Yeah, beginning of April, we're let's go. Snow's gone. There's another snowfall coming. We just got to get the seed in the ground before the next snowfall.
Exactly.
Yes. And hope that you can get it off at the end of the year too.
Well, there is that as well. Yeah, that's the piece. It's feast or famine. It can be too wet, too dry. It's too something every year.
Yeah, and they seed early too, earlier than you would think. As soon as the snow's off, they're really getting into the fields up there.
They only have so many days.
Yeah.
We're talking about Kochia here today at the FMC Pre-School event. Kochia is Dr. Ickley described it as our Palmer amaranth. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think if you look at the prevalence and just the fact that it's such a formidable opponent that it really does affect such substantial acres and, you know, in addition to being yield limiting, but it's just, it's outpacing our ability to control it, much like Palmer is in the U.S.
Yeah, it's kind of just it always feels like it's like sort of one step ahead of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tech sheet here, or I shouldn't say tech sheet, the promo sheet for the event here at the preschool is Kochia, the playground bully in your crops. It does bully us around a little bit, Deanna.
It does. Yeah. I feel like it feels personal, you know, dealing with Kochia. I previously managed our research farm near Hanley, doing R&D work. So just trying to come up with solutions and kind of outthink this weed is so challenging. I feel like you have to throw everything at it, really, every year to get it under control.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the things that you're seeing in the field when it comes to Kochia and some of the strategies that not only your sales agronomists, but also your customers with FMC, what are some of the things that they're doing. And we'll pass that on to the rest of the RealAg Radio and Real Agriculture audience here. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get to dealing with Kochia with Rachel Evans and Deanna McLennan. They are both technical sales managers with FMC, and we're at the FMC Pre-School event at the Western Canadian Crop Production Show. And we'll be back right after this. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hefner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting here today from the Western Canadian Crop Production Show in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. A relatively balmy Saskatoon. It's not warm, but it's also not minus 50 Celsius, everybody. And for all of our American listeners, that's well below minus 40. Minus 40 is where Celsius and Fahrenheit connect. So this can be a cold week in Saskatoon, and it's pretty nice outside. Indeed. Inside, we're talking about a very formidable opponent. It is Kochia. Here at the FMC Pre-School event, there's a bunch of growers from across the province in town to try to learn from Dr. Joe Ickley, who we heard earlier here on the show from NDSU. You know, just to cover again some of the notes I made on drought tolerant, rapid growth, extensive seed production. You know, one plant will produce upwards of 25,000 seeds or more. It competes aggressively. It's salt tolerant. We have weed resistance, 2, 4, 14, that's a good, well, it's a good list, but it's not a good list. And most importantly, which you really can't help me with, I'm allergic to it. Terribly.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Brutal. Hate coat. It's the dust. Because it gets so big, and you kind of get those hot, dry summer part of the summer, and just I'm plugged up, and it's enough whining on my part. Okay, so we're joined here by Rachel Evans and Deanna McLennan, both with FMC. So Deanna, let's start with you. From a management standpoint, what are some of the things that you're talking to customers about in terms of trying to deal with Kochia?
I feel like with Kochia, you need to, as I said, throw everything at it. So that does include using multiple modes of action and herbicides from different groups, but also pairing that with other strategies, like some of these cultural control strategies that I'm sure Joe was mentioning, like growing competitive crops, and some of the more novel strategies like harvest weed seed control.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like the what is it called? Like the seed crusher?
Yes.
Destructor.
Destructor.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. Sounds so powerful. I guess with Kochia, that might not always be a fit. They've been looking at it more with like weeds like wild oats, but
yes. Right. Yeah, one of the challenges that we have as well with Kochia, and this is work that Dr. Charles Geddes is doing right now, that he's probably been on to talk to you about, is just the fact that Kochia seed set happens, depending on where you are, let's say, middle of August. And so if that seed set starts middle of August, that means that if we're trying to manage the weed seed bank of Kochia, that we need to be ideally trying to stop that weed set. And so how do you do that in our crops when we're typically starting harvest, middle of August, I guess, in some areas, but all the way into September and October, right? So it's another challenge that we have with it.
Yeah, one of the strategies that Dr. Ickley mentioned was tillage. Mm. But boy, if I'm farming in Swift Current, I am not I'm looking at every other possible strategy, even crossing my fingers and my toes over and above trying to put a cultivator in the ground.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is, I guess, maybe one of the advantages that, say, the Red River Valley has in Manitoba, is that we still have steel running through that we can take advantage of. But that is certainly not an option everywhere.
Competitive crops.
Yes. I know, again, quoting Dr. Charles Geddes here, but he has done a number of field trials looking at the addition of competitive crops like winter annuals, like winter wheat, fall rye, because planting those in the fall, but then they're ready to go first thing in the spring. And Kochia does germinate incredibly early in the spring. It's the first weed up. So having a crop up and ready early in the spring can help a bit of an edge over top of it.
Yeah, Dr. Ickley mentioned about how it's first out, very frost tolerant. We've all seen that. Mm-hmm. That's also frustrating. Canola gets nuked by the frost, but Kochia just keeps on going. But he talked about how Kochia will hang. It gets established and it sort of hangs there a little bit, and very, very frustrating. He mentioned winter wheat as a potential, because it's so spring established early. The winter wheat maybe gets a bit ahead of it, but winter wheat's not that prolific on the Western Canadian prairies, or at least at this point. Maybe this drives more people to winter wheat trying to deal with Kochia. I don't know.
I think the one that comes up a lot right now too is looking at some of these new hybrid fall rye varieties. They've all of a sudden become much more profitable for farmers and maybe more of a viable option. Something like fall rye has been looked at for number of years as part of an integrated weed management strategy in the mid-Atlantic and southern U.S. And, we've been playing around with it as an opportunity for Canada as well, both in terms of a cover crop option or a relay crop, or just trying to incorporate it into rotation. So I think that those hybrid fall rye varieties are something that's different in the last few years that could be, a piece in this puzzle with managing Kochia.
What about from a chemistry perspective, herbicide layering, multiple modes of action? What do we need to be thinking about there in creating our strategy? Let's take that one.
One piece, I feel like this is the low-hanging fruit here, but as we mentioned, since Kochia does germinate so early, starting with a fall application.
Right.
Thinking ahead in the fall, getting a pre-herbicide down then that will have residual control in the spring, just so when those first Kochia plants are emerging, before you're even thinking about seeding those fields or spraying them, that active will be sitting there and working. And I guess taking down some of the population, so when we come back in with a burn off or an in crop, there should be fewer and maybe a more uniform population that we need to deal with.
Yeah, but one of the challenges is it multiple flushes. So that fall application helps you with that first flush, which is good because it helps to get our crop established and competitive. But when we get those next flushes, what do we do in crop from a herbicide standpoint?
I think we have to start hitting it earlier, right? And so it's not just relying on your residual product alone. It's following up with a burn-off product, and then it's coming in again with your in-crop, so that we're trying to manage the Kochia plants when they're as small as possible. I think that's probably key, but certainly I think the herbicide programs are going to get more complicated as we try and incorporate more modes of action into those systems than less complicated, right? And so that's a challenge for farmers because that means more money tied into their bottom line when it comes to the number of products that they're having to use and the types of products and et cetera, right? So,
but if you're growing spring wheat, and I'm just looking at your sheet here, spring wheat yield loss could be 20%.
Mm-hmm.
That, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yes, more costly per acre on the herbicide front.
Yeah.
But the net benefit is if you're reducing that 20% loss to say more of like a 3% loss, you're money ahead.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely something for farmers to consider, right? Is the cost of not doing anything at all, or the cost of not doing everything right. And I think, Joe Ickley probably mentioned this earlier in this conversation, but just the fact that you have a plant that has, the weed seed longevity of kochia is relatively short compared to some of our other weeds that we face in Western Canada. And so if we can try and manage it aggressively for a few years, we can really try and dwindle that population. So it might not have to be a forever practice. It could just be, an initial sort of setup to success for farmers.
What are some of the other things from a technical standpoint, you're thinking about 2025? What are some other topics that are being discussed a lot out there in the countryside or in meeting rooms? What else comes to mind? It can't be all kochia. Is it that big of a problem?
It's a lot of kochia.
Yeah, wild oats did have a bit of a good year in 2024 with that cool and wet spring we had.
Good for the wild oats, bad for the farmers.
Yeah. Not so great for the kochia too, in a way.
Yeah, right. More moisture is bad for kochia.
Yeah, I feel like kochia can thrive in really any environment, but wild oats were picking up in the northern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan region this past year. So farmers in those areas are having to deal with both now.
How far north is kochia going in Saskatchewan?
It is. Every retail I've been into in the piece has they see kochia,
really?
More in railroads or in their yards type deal.
That's how it starts.
But it's not prevalent in fields. At least that's what they tell me at this moment. But it is becoming, I guess, more widespread in central Alberta.
Yeah, so. We definitely have it in southern Alberta.
Definitely,
it's everywhere.
Yeah, in Manitoba, I'd say water hemp has just been exploding. That's something that since 2018, I think, was the first time that we found it. And since then, it's just exploded. So we have a number of RMs that now have confirmed water hemp pressure. And we do have an RM that does have confirmed Palmer amaranth. So that's, something that weed scientists were telling us for many years that was going to come to Canada. And sure enough, they were right. It's here. So that's something else we have to look forward to, I think.
No scientists being right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when we started to talk about herbicide resistance, for a lot of people that didn't have it yet, it's that's a over there problem. It's a southern U.S. thing. We won't have to worry about it here. That's a cotton problem. And boy, that whole sentiment has whacked us in the face. It is, it's not a case of if, it's when.
Yes.
Essentially. And now we're mitigating some of the impacts, but there are strategies out there, but you got to be really committed to it. And it's a challenge for not only growers in Western Canadian prairies, but really all over North America. Just different weeds, different crops, same problem. Is it a good way to put it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate both of you joining us here. Rachel, it was great to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Deanna, great. Enjoy Alberta. And it was great to chat with you here today.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for us from the Western Canadian Crop Production Show here on this Tuesday. We've been brought to you by FMC Pre-School. This event is the war against kochia. And as you've been hearing here, it's a formidable war, but we can do our best to win it as much as possible. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. If you want more information from FMC, you can follow them on X by going to @FMC Ag Canada, as well as the website ag.fmc.com/ca. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Chat again tomorrow. Cheers everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Fast-acting AIM EC Herbicide is the go-to tank mix for the hottest spring burn-off of the toughest weeds. Plus, get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.